Bristol Johnson. I was the wife of Henry O. Johnson. Henry Johnson was born in New York in 1820, and he was the son of Joel Johnson and Lydia Wing. My parents were Sophia Holcomb and Isaac Bristol. Henry was the only son of 6 children, all sisters. His father died in the 1840s, and his mother ended up moving to Wisconsin and going to live with a daughter in the Wisconsin Dells, which is now known as Lake Delton, where she passed away. He moved to Wisconsin in the 1840s with his wife, Chloe, me. We got married at my mother's house in Essex County, Lewis to be exact, in 1843. When we moved to Wisconsin, I had 2 sisters and a brother who moved also at the same time. My brother Reuben, my sister Lucinda, who married Elijah Stoll, and Elijah was the brother of Israel Stoll, who had the Temperance House, and that's a whole other story. Another sister, Sarah, married Alfred Spooner. They were very, not terribly prolific families, but there are still some descendants in town today, and my great nephew was able to make it today, so I'm honored. They lived near the corner of 7th and Washington, and anyone who's familiar with a little bit of Delavan history, on that corner is what is called the muster tree, which still stands today. The tree's over 200 years old, and it's a bur oak. And the reason it was called the muster tree was because it's so close to the railroad, and when it came time for all the volunteers and enlisted men to take the train, they all gathered there and got onto the train. Therefore, they called it the muster tree. In 1861, Henry enlisted in the War of the States. But being such an honored and respected man, he went in, he was commissioned as a captain, which was very nice to be able to go in as a captain instead of a private. It gave them a few little advantages, but in this war there were no real advantages. After a year as a captain, he was promoted to a major, and he was with the Wisconsin 10th Infantry. He went in Company A, and he was ended up being a captain in a full major in that regiment. He was a major for just over a month when they were in Perryville, Kentucky at Chaplain Hill. There was a terrible, terrible clashing of 4 Wisconsin infantry units and the rebels. Unfortunately, my poor Henry, just as the colonel was calling for the men to fall back, got shot in the breast by a musket or a rifle. And a captain who was nearby asked him, "Are you hurt much?" And he said, "I am killed," and he fell immediately to the ground. That information came from a letter that was written to Alfred Spooner, my brother-in-law, who was an attorney, who sent a letter asking for more information on the death to be sure that the body that they had was the body of Henry Johnson. They also explained that after they fell back, 10 men went back after everything had settled down and took my Henry, and they buried him. And they marked his grave with a wooden board or a tree next to where he was buried, and a piece of stone. But they got his initials on the tree, but when it came to the stone, they only got the H-O. They didn't get the J. But there was a question as to whether that was truly him, and they did guarantee that it was him. They had his personal effects. They had a photo of him. That was one of the things that was returned to the family, and the family, he didn't have whiskers on, and Henry always had whiskers, so it was a little confusing. They wanted to make sure they had the right man. His trunk, which he used as a map chest, and his horse saddle and his horse equipment well, his horse had been killed earlier that day. He was on another horse. That was all left in the field. But the few things that were sent back are his pistol and his buttons. And here is a picture of my dear Henry. We never had a child, but we adopted a daughter, Mary. A year and a half after Henry died, they say I died of a broken heart. I don't know, perhaps. Mary went to live with my sister. And if you wonder why our graves are in this condition, there was vandalism here in the cemetery last year in April. Does anyone have any questions?
My name is Maretta, Huntress, Seymour, Brabazon, and I am the third wife of John R. Brabazon, and he is my second husband. And married in 1894. Prior to that, John had just a wonderful life. He had Civil War service that started in 1862 in August, and he remained in the 28th Regiment, Company E of the Wisconsin Volunteer Infantry until August of 1865. A man with a fighting spirit that was inherited from his family. He was born on the Canadian side of Niagara Falls in a small town called Stanford, Wellington. His father fought for General Wellington at the Battle of Waterloo and then returned to England, and from there moved to the English possessions and landed in Canada. After my husband was born, his family decided to move to the western frontier, and they came to Walworth County, Wisconsin, of all places. John was a remarkable person, absolutely remarkable in every respect. When he came here, he settled a farm up by Sugar Creek. And there, after the war, and again, I must mention that he was in Company E of the 28th Wisconsin. He was wounded at the Battle of Spanish Fort in Alabama, but that did not deter his spirit. He continued and served until the very end. When he returned, he built a poultry business on his farm in Sugar Creek and was very successful. As a matter of fact, he shipped eggs and poultry all over the country. After a period of 16 years or so, he moved into Delavan and resided at 305 Racine Street. The house, by the way, is still there. It was a remarkable home, and he accepted my son from my first marriage as his very own son. My son's name was Robert Seymour Jr. My husband had died during the 1880s, and as a result, I was a widow. So when I met John, he was the perfect match for me. His first wife had died after bearing 3 children. His second wife passed away. So we married and were very, very happy. John was in politics. He was elected alderman in Delavan for a period of 12 years. Always successfully re-elected every year. The one time he ran for mayor, he was defeated. He was a member of various clubs in the area, but he was particularly fond of the GAR, the George H. Thomas Post No. 6, of which he was the commander when he passed away. He was a handsome devil, don't you think? Perhaps just a little bit arrogant looking, but then of course, you know, most politicians are. Don't you agree? He's a handsome devil. Would you like to see my husband? Isn't he? Of course, this photo was taken before the dastardly act that went down in the history of Delavan as just being the most horrible, horrible thing that could have happened. He and a friend of his, who was also a politician, were riding through town in the carriage. some rogue gentleman approached them and said, "I want all your money." Well, my husband jumped from the carriage and said, "No, now let's just talk about this. We'll give you our money, we'll help you out in any way we can, but don't threaten us with weapons." Well, the rogue was so deceitful, so despicable, that he took his fist and lashed out at my husband, hit him in the jaw, broke his jaw, and knocked out several of his beautiful curly white teeth. He nearly died. Luckily, we were able to save him. Ultimately, at the age of 74, he succumbed to a heart attack and died. We postponed his funeral here at the cemetery for several days, simply because his daughter, who lived in Idaho, was unable to come at the immediate time of his death. We postponed the funeral, we had it on a Sunday. They say it was the most well-attended funeral in the history of Delavan to that point in time. Unfortunately, his daughter did not arrive until after the funeral that evening at 8:10. She became snowbound on the western part of the state, and she just didn't make it, so she did not see her father. I come here because it's so peaceful, and I read my poetry and bring in flowers. I come almost every day. I hope you'll come back and visit us. We'd really enjoy that. Your next stop is Mary Chesebro Lee.